And away we go. It's just me at the moment. Not sure if Risk or Eric are going to join, especially since last time they joined. Technical problems have been an issue. However, the show must go on. Hopefully someday they'll come back. If not, well, we must keep going, no matter what. A decade after Brazil's deadly dam collapse, indigenous peoples demand justice on the eve of COP. A week before, what the indigenous Krenak people now call the death of the river. They say they could feel it coming. The birds stopped singing, the air grew heavy, and an unusual silence settled over their village in Minas Gerais, a southeastern Brazilian state where forested hills gave way to the winding. Then, on November 5th, 2015, the mud came. A mining dam owned by Samarco, a joint venture between Brazilian company Vale and Anglo-Australian giant BHP Billiton, burst upstream near the town of Mahiana, unleashing a torrent of toxic iron ore waste. It buried the nearby community of Bento Rodrigues and swept down. Goodness me. It buried the nearby community of Bento Rodrigues and swept down the Doce River Valley, killing 19 people and contaminating waterways for nearly 600 kilometers, 370 miles, before reaching the Atlantic Ocean. For the Krenak people, who once relied on the river for food, rituals, and daily life, the damage was not just environmental, but spiritual. It was the saddest day for my people, said Shirley Chukunya Krenak, an indigenous leader whose community has lived for generations along the Doce River. We felt the depth of the river before it arrived. The Mariana disaster poured an estimate 40 million tons of mining waste into the Doce Basin, devastating one of Brazil's most ancient river systems, whose valley has shaped the landscape of Minas Gerais for millions of years. 10 years later, reconstruction and reparations have dragged on through legal disputes, and the river remains contaminated by heavy metals. Local communities say little has changed, even as Brazil strives to define itself as a leader of global climate policy, while hosting the United Nations COP30 Climate Summit, an event some are skeptical will bring change. For us, the fight isn't about speeches at COP, Krenak said. It's about survival. Now, whatever opinions people have on the climate that we live in, including myself, I think this just comes to show and also kind of proves my point about my skepticism and concerns about climate change. Whilst I'm aware that parts of our climate do change, I'm also aware that there are people that talk about climate change and the disastrous effects that come with it if we supposedly don't do something about anything. The negative effects on our environment will devastate us. Having that said from an indigenous person living in the forest, I would take their word for it more so than the so-called climate change experts and other leaders that are somewhat advocating for climate change. What do these people know about climate change if they haven't actually spent a week, at least minimum, living in nature and using natural resources that surrounds them? I can tell you right now, they know diddly squat about that, yet they still continue saying, we have to do this, we have to do that. Stop eating red meat, we have to stop using our cars to get around. To me, it just sounds like an excuse to limit our freedom of movement, as well as an excuse to make some kind of profit out of using services that people believe and assume would combat the negative effects of, quote, climate change that the experts are saying will devastate us. I'm aware that our climate does change in ways that we can understand. However, unless people that are making these claims about climate change, unless they have actually lived in the jungle, drank from whatever river that is suitable for drinking, grow their own food, and live in shelters that people have to make by hand using natural resources that surrounds them, I'm not taking their words on on anything climate related. No, I'm in denial, nor I'm going to listen to anyone on anything. I'm just not going to take people's word for something on anything seriously unless they have the experience being in such climate or an environment which they say we have to protect. Again, an indigenous person of the Krenak people talking about the devastation of the river and the environments which they live in, that I take seriously because they live in the climate. They know what it's like having people's urban way of life contaminating or even sabotage the ways of life for people that embrace nature. And of course, urban living is inevitable, regardless how much we try to preserve our environments, make reserves for wildlife. We can't just build anything out of concrete or cement, and not have any kind of vegetation. Not just for the sake of wildlife, but also I've seen a couple of research papers that planting trees along roads, streets, anywhere in a city can reduce the surrounding temperature of that street by at least 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. It could be more. However, planting trees, it's not just for the sake of preserving wildlife or reducing the greenhouse gases that's in our air. It has properties that reduces temperature. If there aren't any trees in like major cities, the the pavement, like the ground surface temperature would be like 40 degrees Celsius, which is, well, 40 degrees Celsius max, which is very, very hot. But with trees, that could just go down to at max 20 degrees Celsius. I found that quite interesting. Of course, make that information as you will. So back to the dam collapse. All I can say is don't mess with our environment. Don't mess with nature. But even when we have to consider our environment, that does not mean we should change our ways of life drastically. We just got to find ways around it. So that way, we don't have to at least we don't have to hear these claims about climate change anymore, because these people are desperate to get someone on board and try to fearmonger people. That I do not like. People can have whatever opinions they like, and that's okay. I'm all for that. Just do not make claims that does not amount to anything, and even if these claims are somewhat true, don't blow these claims or predictions out of proportion for the sake of fearing people into making changes into their lives that isn't just damaging to our human bodies, but also damaging to how we contribute to our local communities. I'll say that. And I'm not going to go against people saying that climate change is a hoax or a scam. There are aspects in our climate that's far beyond human control. And if we try to do anything about that, what good what what good does that come out of that? What good comes out of making subtle changes or drastic changes in our lives, all to preserve and protect or reduce the negative effects of climate change? Kim Kardashian says ChatGPT made her fail legal exams all the time, bugger. That is not good. Kim Kardashian, a reality TV star who graduated from a law program in May, revealed that she used ChatGPT to study for exams, but it often led her in the wrong direction and caused her to fail tests. Kardashian said she would get frustrated with ChatGPT and yell at it for making her fail, to which the AI would respond by telling her it was teaching her to trust her own instincts. Despite her struggles with the AI, Kardashian shared that she will be qualified as a lawyer in 2 weeks and is considering pursuing a career as a trial lawyer in the future. Good grief. And people ask, why am I having concerns about AI and people being reliant on such technology to do anything? This story exactly proves that point. Someone is using ChatGPT to get a law degree, and no matter how hard anyone tries to use ChatGPT, they still fail because you're relying on an artificial intelligent language model to just spoon feed you answers, and instead of actually thinking for yourself and actually question ChatGPT on the answers they give you. I actually had a chat with my dad about ChatGPT. I'm not sure exactly what my dad was using ChatGPT for, but it was something related to music concerts, maybe something for church, either one of the two, but he's active in both of these things. He asked ChatGPT to provide something for him. ChatGPT gave the answer as instructed by the prompt my dad gives, but then my dad actually has given clarification like, yeah, but I wanted to point out this. I want it in that way. So my dad was giving specific prompts and clarifications, and it did that, but it then missed out other key details that it provided in the last response, which was actually just as useful as, or if not much more useful than the last time ChatGPT gave the answer. And then my dad continued the cycle of clarifying and adding specifications over and over again until ChatGPT said, "You have now reached your limit." All what that shows me is that ChatGPT is wanting my dad to charge ChatGPT or OpenAI extra money to use as a subscription to get access to the more advanced capabilities, only to give the same answers in the same format that has given previously every single time. And my dad's like, nope, I'm not putting up with that. I'm not going to pay OpenAI money just to provide a better answer for ChatGPT to provide a clearer, better answer than what it just gave me. And I agree with him. And subscriptions for ChatGPT is a completely different story. However, back to Kim Kardashian using ChatGPT to succeed in quote unquote, succeed in legal exams. Yeah, I think this is a great example for anyone that's doing an essay on, anything or taking any exams or tests for any degree at university or college. This should tell you that whilst AI, as smart and fully capable as it is to provide whatever answers wanted you to provide to you, it's not going to work out in your favor. At least not always. At most, sometimes. Also, to which the AI would respond by telling her it was teaching her to trust her own instincts. Now, that's the damning part. Now, it is one thing to use ChatGPT to succeed in exams, only to realize that the answers that Kim Kardashian provided in that exam, provided by ChatGPT, had made her fail miserably, or at least fail, like firmly. It is much worse that during the process of using ChatGPT, it was teaching Kim Kardashian to trust her own instincts in regards to law. And yet, she still went ahead to use ChatGPT in the way she hoped to use ChatGPT to help succeed in her law/legal exams. And yet she still failed. Kim Kardashian was literally rejecting and not trusting your own instincts. So then now that begs the question. Does Kim even trust herself? Does Kim trust herself as much as she trusts ChatGPT? Now this is sad. This is very sad times. I honestly I do not have anything against Kim Kardashian. Well, but sometimes I worry about how people use AI for just anything, not just with exams, but how people are so reliant on just any AI chatbots to for them to, and expecting them to give the answers to questions people ask. What happens if the AI chatbots did not have the virality or the motivation or even the innovation that it had? What if ChatGPT didn't become so popular? What if OpenAI as a company was not at the stage in their success that they are right now? How would people ask questions about anything that ever comes to people's minds? We don't ask these questions often. And we should. We absolutely should ask more questions like that often. This is a very good example why you should never trust AI for anything. Even it even has the capabilities to give detailed and expansive answers that certainly answers the question much better than how people ask the question. No matter how good AI can be, that does not mean it's good enough to go on with life. Sometimes we have to actually think for ourselves and not have someone else think for us. That is just sad. I'm concerned for our future and the next generation, whether it be Gen Alpha and yes, dare I say, Gen Beta. Yeah, there's actually Gen Beta now. Who come up with these names? Goodness me. Anyway, yeah, this is worrying. I don't know what to think of today's society anymore. I'm not sure if children that are in school now are even capable enough to even get a job as much as 10, 20 years ago at their age, if that makes sense. This opens a whole can of worms. And yeah, not the good kind. It does not work out for anyone that we are relying on a chatbot, a piece of technology created by humans, and then so many humans using such technology and its reliance has dumbed them down. Not just a little bit, but a significant amount. Not too much, but you are going to start noticing the amount of times people use AI to query on anything. That is worrying. Very worrying. Now that is scary. It's not end of the world yet, but I'm not sure if I'm ready for the next decade, because things are going to get real. Very real. These are the airports that will reduce flights during the government shutdown. On Wednesday, the Federal Aviation Administration announced plans to cut air traffic by 10% at 40 high-volume US airports, starting Friday, November 7th, and reaching full reductions next week. The reductions stem from the federal government shutdown, which has left air traffic controllers working without pay since early October, causing staffing shortages and flight delays. According to Airport Council International North America, the 40 busiest airports include Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Los Angeles International Airport (LAX), and John F. Kennedy International Airport (JFK). Cuts apply to flights scheduled from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., while international flights are exempt. Oh, of course, international flights are exempt from that. Airlines are offering refunds or rebooking options for impacted customers, and Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy warned, "I think it's going to lead to more cancellations, but we are going to work with the airlines to do this in a systematic way." Framed as a safety measure, the FAA said the 10% reductions aim to maintain travelers' safety if the shutdown continues, and FAA Administrator Brian Bedford said the agency will release the list on Thursday and meet with airline executives. And yeah, the government shutdown in the US it's still going to keep going, maybe for another week or two, as of this recording. Yeah, but the government shutdown's going to keep going because whilst the federal employees are not getting paid for their work, the United States still has enough money from its own economy to keep these services going. Somehow. It's wild that government agencies and government services are still going on, whilst no pay is given to them. I'll give them credit for still committing to their jobs, regardless of pay, of course. However, there's going to come a point, if the shutdown continues, that federal employees are just going to what's the point being here? I'm just gonna take a few days off and come back when the shutdown's at. Personally, I'd do the same, because if I'm gonna work at a job, I would expect some kind of pay, just enough for me to afford food, the cost for electricity, the gas, at least a pay that's enough to get by for the week, maybe the month. Because if you're not getting paid, then what else are we doing? There's a cost to everything, and we have to get by no matter how hard times can be. Anyway, that's all I have to say on that. Well, all I can say is, eventually, it's going to come to a point the government of the US will open up again, and federal employees will continue getting paid as they would. That I know for sure, that this shutdown isn't going to last forever, just like I've seen with the SAG-AFTRA strike, whilst many actors, writers, and other entertainment industry professionals and employees demanded for higher pay. They still kept going until eventually a deal was agreed to raise their pay and continue with the work. So the government shutdown is no different. Eventually, the government will have to reopen again. There will be money flowing to the government agencies and employees. That the government won't last forever. Whilst, as of this recording, the current US government shutdown is the longest we've seen in history. It's not going to last long. I'd say another week or two before Senator Republicans and Democrats decide to come back and actually trying to agree on something and continue with their works as they should. Not that they do it well, but they should anyway. Sudanese paramilitary group agrees to humanitarian truce proposed by US-led mediators. The Rapid Support Forces (RSF) accepted a US-led humanitarian truce proposed by the Quad on Thursday, following its seizure of El Fasher city over a week earlier. Amid a war that began in April 2023, more than 14 million people have been displaced, and the World Health Organization reports at least 40,000 deaths, while over 24 million face acute food insecurity. Mediators known as the Quad, US, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, proposed the deal. After nearly 10 days of negotiations, and Masad Boulos said it starts with a 3-month humanitarian truce followed by a 9-month political process. It remains uncertain whether the army will accept the deal as currently proposed, as the Sudanese military demands RSF withdrawal from civilian areas and weapon surrender, while the RSF is open to cessation talks. Humanitarian groups report escalating atrocities and displacement, including over 450 killed at a hospital and more than 70,000 fleeing El Fashir in 1 week to Al Afad camp, while 83% of families lack enough food. That is so sad. To all the millions of Sudanese people who have lost their lives to the RSF, I say rest in peace to those people, and I send my deepest condolences to the friends and family of those millions of Sudanese people whose lives were lost. May not be million Sudanese people, but I know for certain that there have been Sudanese people whose lives were lost. And what's really disheartening, I've seen many videos online looking at satellite pictures of Sudan and the blobs of red blood on the ground that you can see, like on Google Maps or whatever website where maps are available. But recent satellite images of Sudan, you can see blobs of red. That shows where the Sudanese lives were lost. How has this world ever come to that point? How could we allow that to happen? No one should ever go through that. What do these people gain from such atrocities, genocides? It doesn't, to me, it makes no sense. There is no gain from unaliving people. There is certainly no gain from inciting violence on anyone. I don't want to see that happen to me, and I don't want to see any of that happen to anyone else, even my worst enemies. Again, there's people I may not like, but I will never ask for anything like that. What's happening to people in Sudan to happen to my enemies? It's absolutely awful. It's outrageous. And actually, in recent times as of this recording, in recent times, I've been hearing more about Sudan, but then I started hearing less about what's going on between Israel and Gaza. Something my dad has brought up. Like, where's the report about Gaza and Israel? Haven't heard much about them often in recent times. And he's right. Again, even though the attention has now shifted to Sudan, we should never take focus out of the lives that have been lost in countries or states around the world. And again, everyone can raise awareness on horrible atrocities around the world. Whilst people now are talking about Sudan, just like how people have been talking about Palestine for the last year or two. I'm still not hearing about what's going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I'm not hearing often about what's going on in Nigeria. And what's going on in Ethiopia. And I know there's more atrocities going on in other African countries. Yet we just don't hear about them because talking about such topics in those countries are not as popular what's going on in Sudan as of now, and not as popular what's going on in Palestine, specifically in Gaza last year or two. And at the same time, not as popular as about what's been going on in Ukraine. It's very sad that reporting on such horrific events is more of a competition. It is awful. No one should go through such horrible atrocities. Whatever happens, I hope that people can continue to live their lives peacefully. It's very sad. Again, rest in peace to the lives of Sudanese people whose lives were already lost. I send deepest condolences to their friends and family. And I also send my condolences and rest in peace to any other lives lost in Nigeria, Ethiopia, Togo, people in Gaza, and also in Ukraine. Whilst people may not talk about what's going on in Ukraine, it does not make what's going on in Ukraine any less important. And
I have no problem about people raising awareness on such horrible events like that. Find out.